Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So guys, it is pouring down here, so if my feed cuts out, that's why. I wasn't snuffed out. My feed just went down because of the storm. Alright, levels are good, perfect. There's something I want to talk about that's taking place right now. So the Trump administration has come out saying it's going to put the most stringent sanctions in history on the Iranian government. Now, the wild part about this is it's the Trump administration that's putting sanctions. However, it's that same administration that actually broke the agreement. There was an international agreement. Iran didn't do anything to break the agreement. European countries are staying with them. And in an odd quirk, Donald Trump has managed to separate us from our closest allies in Europe. It's amazing. You look around and you look at your bedfellows and you have one country, Saudi Arabia, that are chopping off heads. And you have the other one that's essentially holding an open-air ghetto with friends like these. Nevertheless, the sanctions that Donald Trump is trying to put on Iran are supposed to, think of it this way. In addition to the sanctions, he's come out saying we have certain demands, 12 demands that we need to be followed in order for us to have this other conversation on another deal. Now, of course, this is lunacy. Nobody in their right mind is going to make a deal with Donald Trump after Donald Trump broke the international agreement. But that's kind of the point. The point is not for it to make a deal. Now, I need to explain how I see this and how I process stuff like this in my head, because otherwise it doesn't fully make sense. Back in 1914, maybe, essentially, before World War I started, Archduke Ferdinand was shot. He was visiting in, I forget the country he was visiting in, but he's shot. They find out that the person is of Serbian descent, and events started to kick off. So Austria-Hungary, the map looks completely different, and in an odd way, the world that we're living in now is a direct result of what took place back then. Germany gives Austria-Hungary their pledges that if anything pops off, we will back you up. But Germany wasn't necessarily fully on board with this idea of war. Russia decides it would back up Serbia. Off to the races. Russia starts this kind of military buildup, not necessarily because it was looking for a war, but because it didn't want to be caught flat-footed. At that point, Germany started to build up. You have this back and forth. But one of the things that preceded all of this was an ultimatum. Oh, I love history. Like, they presented an ultimatum because countries are like people. They want to coat what they're doing in this kind of thing of this makes logical sense. And in a weird way, we have this odd moral standard of trying to, of fairness. Meaning whatever we do, we try to create a pretext and a reason to do it as opposed to just doing it in a naked way. So Israelis don't want to just murder Palestinians, even though they just want to murder Palestinians. They need to cut it in a way of saying, we're doing this because of Hamas. We don't want the world to think we're monsters, so we need to come up with a pretext and a reason for which we are doing these horrible, gross, and repugnant things. I'm saying countries are somewhat the same way, and Israel, at that point, is the country. It repeats. Like history rhymes. I'm going to show this, and he's going to give a breakdown. It's about 5 minutes long in regards to the events that leading up to the war. I gave a snapshot, but he goes into more detail. And especially listen for when he gets to the point of saying the ultimatums. Meaning, they gave them a list of ultimatums. They could comply. Serbia could comply with all of the items on the list with the exception of one. Because in one of the ultimatums, it was full well understood that there was no way they could comply to it. They wanted to essentially run an investigation inside somebody else's country. It's like Mexico saying, hey, we want to have an investigation, essentially run roughshod over your own judicial system and implant our people in to do this investigation. No country in their right mind is going to give up their sovereignty in that way. And so there was war. There was conflict. But the point I'm trying to make here is, it was the point. Meaning the ultimatum itself is trying to code itself and saying, hey, we're trying to be peaceniks. We're trying to come to some resolution. But you absolutely know that the government in question can't necessarily stick or do all of the items on that ultimatum list. In which case, you end up getting the war that you wanted, that you didn't necessarily want to ask for. Well, I'm making the point that the Trump administration is setting up to do the exact same thing. Take a look at this. This is called The Great War. I love this documentary. Each day, he gives you what was taking place on that particular day back in like 1914 during the entire duration of the war. This goes for 3 years. But this one is just the beginning and how it started. He gives it in a snapshot, so this is awesome. It's not fully detailed, but it's enough for you to understand what's taking place, and he has an awesome way of delivering it. So. Imagine for the moment that you're living during that time, and imagine for the moment that they had internet and web or whatever else, and you could get feedback and dispatches from what's taking place in regards to the, I guess you could say, the zeitgeist. What would they be saying? What would the military people in Germany be telling their people? What would the military people in Russia tell their people? Like, I'm trying to get across this thing of the propaganda that would be taking place within those states, propaganda to the people within their own states to get them worked up with this idea of a necessary conflict. What does it look like for us? Like, propaganda is not something that's just out there for dictators. It also takes place in our, what we will call civil societies. I'm saying, look at this in the context of where we are now and how our governments work with us now, or interact now. Let's keep going, because I want him to get to the point where he's talking specifically about the person that essentially kicked all of this off, or how all of this ended up getting kicked off. The first part, I think you recognize that incompetence is also part of the mix. When people kind of make this point that Donald Trump is going to get us into a war, and I've made this point that he's going to attack Iran, and I've been told by HA that, oh, dude, that's not going to happen. That completely belies historical significance. I mean, World War I was not expected. None of these people thought they were going to be at war. Many of these people were related and were shocked as shit that they were in these things having these battles. All wars are not fully intentional, and even though these guys were talking about war planning and everything else, they hadn't necessarily made the decision to go to war. Let's keep going. I guess my point is, you don't need everybody in the administration to want to go to war to end up in a war. And in Trump's case, he has multiple people whispering in his ear that wants to attack Iran. This is his pretext. Now, listen to what's taking place here. All of the military machinations and everything else is kind of behind the scenes. But what they're using here is this pretext of weapons of mass destruction. Oh, I'm sorry, it's not weapons of mass destruction. It's your government had something to do with the person who assassinated Archduke Ferdinand. They get information saying that's not true, that the government didn't have anything to do with it. I think it was some group called the Black Hand or something. But let's let him keep going, because this is awesome. And again, look at this as if it's a living, breathing thing, because you are living and breathing history. This stuff rhymes over and over and over again. And when people don't have the historical context, they look at it as if it's something new and be like, oh my God, this has never happened before. Yes, it has. It has. This thing of here's an ultimatum and here's an ultimatum that I know you would never meet, that would allow us to get into a conflict because I want to do something to you. In this case, they wanted to reduce the size of Serbia. Not to mention they were fearing the Russian influence. Let's keep going.
Now, this didn't really change anything.
They were essentially being belligerent, created a pretext, and say, hey, you're not fulfilling our thing. Not to mention, these guys, they bent over backwards to meet their demands. And yet, it wasn't enough. Because there was nothing that they could do that would be enough. They literally wanted to install their people into their judicial system, into the judicial system of another country. They knew goddamn well that no country in their right mind was going to allow them to do that. It was meant to fail. It was an ultimatum that was meant to fail. I'm making the point that the same thing is taking place here in regards to the way Donald Trump is winding this thing up with Iran. It's like we're getting rid of the deal itself. You have certain Israelis talking about that Iran is breaking the deal now, which is nonsense. None of the other governments are backing them up on that. Israel has been putting out propaganda that something has somehow changed and that Iran was somehow, again, breaking the deal. Nonsense. It doesn't matter if it's nonsense. Just like they're saying, there was no evidence of what was taking place back then. And again, it didn't matter. The military plan, what they wanted to do, took precedent over the reality of what was taking place in regards to on the ground. Let's keep going.
Actually, Russia suggested
The map used to look different. Austrian Empire. It believed that with German help, they for the most part can take down governments that were there. It believed wrong. Ultimately, Serbia was demolished. Yeah, that's true. But the Austrian Empire no longer exists. We are doing something very similar. Donald Trump passing sanctions on Venezuela and putting sanctions on Iran. And in the way that he's putting sanctions, essentially trying to put economic pressure on both of these countries, saying we're going to make their economy scream and all this other stuff. And then trying to, again, give them ultimatums that no country in their right mind could ever live up to. Or let's say live down to. We're repeating. We're absolutely repeating. The story that this comes from is this right here. Just so you can see where it is, I'll put it at the bottom. Trump pulls out of Syria, bear all to IAEA. Why the 12-point U.S. list for Tehran is ultimatum meant to fail. And let's read some of it. The United States has laid out 12 demands for Iran that they said Tehran must meet for a new nuclear deal. That's not going to happen. Problem is, telling Tehran troops out of Syria, dictating what nuclear watchdog inspections doesn't sound like a real roadmap to peace. One of the things they wanted to do was essentially have the Tehran, essentially Iranian troops, to get out of Syria. Mind you, these troops were invited there by the Syrian government. The United States was not invited by the Syrian government. And the United States wants them to leave the country. That's fucking amazing in and of itself. And they also, let's see, here's another one. One major point for the bargaining, however, unrelated to the Iranian nuclear program, it reads, Iran must withdraw all forces under Iranian commands from Syria. The demand conveniently ignores the fact that Iranian troops were invited by the Syrian government and have been helping fight the Islamic State on the ground, while the United States troops stuck in Syria indefinitely were not. Nobody invited them there, Russian ambassador to the UN said in February, reminding the world that the presence was illegal. It's not hard to guess which forces the Syrian government want to keep and which ones it wants gone. Another U.S. demand is that Iran must respect the sovereignty of the Iraqi government and permit disarming, demobilization, and reintegration of Shia militias. Just as in Syria, Iranian troops are in Iraq with the approval of Baghdad, and the country's popular mobilization force even received funding and training from Iran that have been declared part of Iraq's security apparatus. So why would they need to disband and leave? Yeah, I guess my point is the United States knows damn well that after breaking an agreement, an international agreement, that Iran is not going to make another agreement with them. These things are put out there with the intention on failing and with the intention on causing chaos. This is just like a repeat of World War I. And I use World War I for a specific reason. There's so many countries that are involved in Syria in this case. You have Iran, Syria, you have Qatar, you have Saudi Arabia, Israel, Turkey, the UK, France. All of these countries are involved in this one aspect of the world. And if something pops off, not to mention Russia, this would be cataclysmic. We should be very careful about the steps that we take in this part of the world. And yeah, you already know how I feel about the ultimatum. So I'm not going to keep this long because there's a thunderstorm and it feels like this stuff is about to fall down. What's wrong, guys? What's wrong? You can hear? No sound? God damn it. Pretty sure the number of Skype. Alright, I'll have to redo this video. That sucks. Could we not text them all? No, guys, sometimes I don't see it when I'm doing the video itself. I don't necessarily see it, so I can't necessarily see a thing at the same time. Just on the history of it, okay. What I'll do is I'll replicate that video. I just have to redo this particular video. I'm sorry, guys. That sucks. It's a great video. Essentially, it's making this argument that they were creating a pretext. Essentially, Serbia or Austria was creating a pretext in order to attack Serbia, believing that with the backing of Germany, it could essentially win the war. The problem with this is that the evidence that they were using in order to attack them was essentially dubious at best. Serbia or Austria-Hungary knew that Serbia wasn't necessarily aligned with it. I mean, that's the reports that came back from the government. And they gave them this 15-point ultimatum in which Serbia, for the most part, had lived up to the majority of them. But one of the main ones was they wanted to be part of their legal system's apparatus. It was nonsense. It's like, well, it would be insane. Nobody would do that. They knew that was going to lead to a war. That's my point. So, I'm sorry this video got fucked up. I'm sorry. Got screwed up. Alright. So, I am... No audio on that clip, Jamal. Damn it. Side note, watch H. Boomerang's Election Watch 2017 vid on YouTube. It expands Brexit beyond just protest votes and put more blame on Tories. That's interesting. Jamal, you got to tweet out your live stream notifications. I've received 1 notification per week on average from YouTube. Are you serious? Alright. I will tweet out my videos. I am bad at doing that because usually I'm just kind of in a moment. It's like, fuck it, let's do it live. But I'll try to tweet out. I'll get better at that, Balthazar. I will get better at that. And also, I'll do this video over again because that sucks. We need to create a punch list for Jamal. Yeah, that sucks. It's a great video. It's a great video. I need to figure out what went wrong with the sound and try this again. Alright, guys. If you enjoyed the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you can always support the Patreon despite this video being somewhat fucked up. Thanks, guys.